Thank you, Scott. Now let me welcome to the podium Addison Snell, the CEO of Intersect360 Research. Intersect360 Research is an industry analyst and consulting firm dedicated to the HPC market. They publish market forecasts and technology trends based on quarterly end user surveys and spending and installations. So, Addison, thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to Seattle. I'm Addison Snell with Intersect360 Research. I'm always delighted to come to the Supercomputing Conference. What Scott was saying in terms of the theme of connecting communities could be said about supercomputing in any given year. This is an important nexus for the worldwide high-performance computing community, and Earl, who will present right after me, will attest to the fact that as analysts, this is a busy and important week for us. As analysts, the number of people we'd like to meet with while we're here is limited to only all of the vendors, all of the user community, and if we can squeeze in the policymakers and everybody in the press, then that'd be a good, successful conference. So it's a critical week for us, and I'm delighted to meet anyone here, take follow-up questions if I don't get to talk to you personally. It's just a great event, and I thank Scott and the SC11 committee for having us. Intersect360 Research, as John said, is an industry analyst and consulting firm dedicated to HPC. We do market sizing, market forecasting, technology trend analysis. We're driven by quarterly surveys of the worldwide user community, driven primarily through our content and research exclusive partnership with Tabor Communications, the publishers of HPC Wired, Datanami, HPC in the Cloud, but also using other sources as available and as necessary. It's difficult to distill down a year's worth of research into a 10-minute presentation. We had a few handouts on the chairs that there's an 8.5 by 11 of our distilled down of our publications from the past year, front and back, as well as our fun set of 4 HPC trivia cards. They're little Trivial Pursuit style cards with questions that are driven by reports that we published in 2011, so take a look at those. If you don't get a copy, see me. I've got a few more. I do a weekly podcast with my partner Michael Feldman in the front row. We're delighted to have any listeners to that. And what I'm really excited about is our analyst crossfire session, which will come up at Supercomputing this Friday. We've done a few of them in the past, and I'll talk about that at the end. To start at the top level, we do market sizing, market forecasting. 2009, of course, was a big dip year due to the worldwide recession, and then it came back pretty strong in 2010. We saw 22% growth. Now, a big part of that, I need to stress, is that high-performance computing, even from the entry level up through supercomputing, is a pretty long sales cycle item on average. And a big thing that happens in a recessionary year is the sales cycles stretch out a little bit. So if it used to take 8 weeks to buy it, now it takes 12, or it used to take 12 and now it takes 18, you wind up dropping 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks worth of revenue out of 1 year and into the next year. So a lot of what happened in 2009 in that dip wasn't real loss. It was more of a delay in purchasing. Now, some was real loss. If you took the growth curve from back out here and extrapolated it, we're still a little below the line from where we would be. Especially in academia and government, you had some loss in grants, loss in endowments where the endowment funds weren't there, and that was some real loss. But that's why the big jump from 2009 to 2010. We're going to need to revisit the 2011 number, 2012 number in the context of what's happening in Europe. That wasn't part of our forecast, the Greek and Italian crises and what would happen with the euro. So we'll see how the year wraps up. But the commercial sectors are still quite strong, and we believe that we are going to see ongoing growth going forward. Servers are still the largest component, of course, but they're shrinking as an overall percentage. Storage is the highest growth product sector year on year, and big data will continue to accelerate that. We're very inclusive in terms of the use cases. We're not only looking at all of the technologies, but all of the different use cases that comprise high-performance computing. This conference trends a little more toward the high-performance technical computing side, which is our category for science and engineering types of applications that constitute about 70% of the market from a revenue perspective. But we also look at high-performance business computing, which is our category for the non-scientific business applications of high-performance computing technologies in finance, in online games, in ultra-scale internet. And the way it breaks out on a percentage basis is in these pie charts here. This technical computing side, the science and engineering applications, of course, this is commercial as well. When Ford or Toyota or British Petroleum or Pfizer buys computers, these are commercial organizations, but they're doing science and engineering, right? So 40% of the high-performance technical computing side is commercial applications, whether it's in automotive, aerospace engineering, or consumer product manufacturing, pharmaceuticals. There's a lot of components there. About 35% of it is government, whether it's in security or research or agency, state and local, and about 25% is academic. Now, these two pies are drawn the same size for scale so you can read them, but the one on the left is 70% of the market, the one on the right is 30% of the market. Another way to look at it is these two manufacturing components combined, the large product and consumer product manufacturing, are a little bit larger combined than the financial services on the other side. So financial services, we're looking at applications in trading, in risk management is actually the largest and fastest growing segment in finance, pricing, in analytics. And then we also have things like ultra-scale internet applications, media and entertainment applications, online games, which is like the servers behind things like World of Warcraft, have a very large real-time I/O component. If my avatar jumps around the corner and fires, I want that to happen in real time. If there's a half-second delay and I die, my satisfaction in the game starts going down fairly quickly, right? We see some applications in logistics and transportation. Big data will have an effect there as well. This is over 95% commercial almost by definition, although we do have some things like, say, the Federal Reserve Bank, or if the Wharton School of Business buys a computer specifically for studying business applications, we'd put it over there. This is important to track because of the different software approaches we see in different industries. I've put a few of the pie charts on here. The ones that are more engineering oriented are in the middle. This is solids modeling, computer-aided engineering. This is computational fluid dynamics, so you have the solids and the fluids. The blue zones are third-party software applications, packaged applications. And those engineering areas tend to be dominated by the packaged applications. But if you go into oil and gas, finance also has the same model. You tend to have a few packaged applications that are important, but the majority of the work is done with in-house algorithms that are written custom for my own company. If you go out to bio and life sciences, you have yet another trend where the majority are open source and public codes. Public, the purple there, being a variety of open source where some people pay some licensing costs. Gaussian is a good example of that, but it's predominantly an open source model. So when you hear people complaining about software costs, that's true. You get it in engineering a lot. People can pay 3-4 times as much for software as they do for hardware, but it's not pervasive throughout high-performance computing. It depends what segment you're looking at, and that's why these vertical breakdowns are so important. If we look geographically, we showed a version of this chart last year. This is the first time we've put up a chart where North America comprised less than 50% of the market. This is down from 51% last year, continuing to fall as a percent. We're going to really need to look at this Europe, this EMEA slice that's 31% now. Some of that's going to be in jeopardy this year going into next year. And there's still some trouble in the U.S. government and U.S. academic in terms of the grant spending there. Really a big opportunity for Asia to make a gain in terms of a geographic share percentage going this year into next year. I did prepare a chart on server revenue share since that's the largest component. IBM has been the consistent #1 from a revenue perspective on the server side. HP has overtaken Dell to go from #3 to up to #2. They were just behind Dell before and are now a solid #2, mostly because they were the biggest beneficiary of Sun falling back fairly dramatically over the last 2 years in the Oracle acquisition. Now, Oracle is still in this market, but not nearly as strongly. HP seems to have picked up the majority of those points. We have Cray, we have SGI. There are a number of others that are difficult to track exactly from a revenue standpoint because they're predominantly private companies as opposed to SGI or Cray, which are easier to track. But we don't think there are any of them that are bigger than that Cray wedge right now in the HPC space. A word on doing this from the analyst perspective, this is not as simple as going to the vendors and saying, hey, how many units and how much revenue did you sell in HPC last quarter? Within HPC, it's difficult because IBM, HP, Dell sell the same product lines both inside and outside HPC. So if you ask them that, first of all, they don't know the answer. And second of all, if they did know the answer, they can't provide guidance to the analysts because it's below the business unit level. So it would violate Sarbanes-Oxley. We certainly do have conversations with the suppliers on a regular basis, but we rely heavily on regular end user research to help us guide these revenue shares. I hope I have time to run through a couple of HPC trends for 2011. I will assure you we have data behind all of these, but it goes beyond what we can put up pie charts on all the charts here. And these are some of the things we've guided our clients on this year. Accelerator adoption, which was mentioned by Scott, is of course very important. We've seen 2/3 of the market at least testing accelerators. Most of that is not full-scale deployment, but 2/3 of the HPC market reporting testing of accelerators. NVIDIA has a dominant share of that right now. 90% of the people who have tested accelerators have tested NVIDIA. They might have tested other things as well, but 9 out of 10 have at least tested NVIDIA GPUs. The real architectural consideration of the future is going to be how much of that starts getting subsumed by the Intel Mic architecture now that it's a standard x86 deployment with Intel tools. That NVIDIA versus Intel is going to be interesting, and of course AMD still has Fusion. Storage is the fastest growing product sector. There are some interesting things here. A lot of consolidation that's been very important, and we could rattle them all off, but you know them. The Lustre roadmap has been stabilized in large part by the presence of Wham Cloud, who's developed a presence much larger than the size of their company. They're a very important player in the Lustre space right now. InfiniBand's growth has been largely capped as a system interconnect. It's run up against Ethernet and has not been displacing Ethernet in a lot of the spaces here. For InfiniBand to continue to grow, it's going to need to find new markets, either as a storage interconnect or outside of traditional HPC. The biggest finance application area is risk management. I'm mentioning this because of finance being such a high growth segment. Finance will add more revenue into HPC than any other vertical market over the next 5 years. And legislation is coming down on risk management in finance like God's own lightning. They are really trying very hard to cope with the increased legislation in this area right now, and it's leading to increased revenue for HPC. Facilities is continuing to increase as a share of budget overall. I'm giving a hint toward the answer to one of our trivia questions on our cards. Memory usage has been tracking very steadily with multi-core. This is something, and again on the end user research side, we looked at. Do people look at memory per core, per socket, per node? It's really been per core has been fairly constant. So as you get more sockets per node and especially more cores per socket, the memory usage in these systems has been doubling and redoubling, which is really putting a strain on a lot of the technology there. On the services side, programming services is a hot sector. A lot of the architectural changes that we're seeing are putting pressure on the programming services side as people struggle to optimize their applications for multi-core, for accelerators, for cloud. There's a lot going on the programming side. However, cloud, which had been growing, is really only 3% of spending and seems to be staying there. We reached the asymptote of adoption there very quickly that we had predicted, and we got there faster than we thought, but we didn't punch through it. And it's not clear how much more quickly we'll see a lot more cloud adoption for high-performance computing applications, not because of a lack of drivers, but because of a prevalence of barriers. Bandwidth being the top one. These are tough applications to get in and out of cloud scenarios, security being another major one, of course. Windows share, which we'd been talking about the previous 2 years, also seems to have flattened out. The technical computing initiative that's put a lot behind Azure might be part of it. Now, Windows is still an important player. They're on 7% of HPC nodes in 2010. We haven't finalized the number for 2011 yet, but it seems like the growth that had been happening there that brought them 1%, 2%, 3%, 7%, then kind of leveled out. And then finally, big data. There's a theme of data-intensive computing this year as well. Absolutely represents a huge opportunity for many HPC technology vendors. Not that one equals the other, but there are a lot of HPC technologies that are important as you go forward in big data market opportunities, whether you look at research analytics, enterprise analytics, real-time applications like complex event processing, data mining, visualization. A lot of these technologies have been nascent in HPC for a long time. We're launching a study on the opportunity for HPC vendors in big data applications, and that's going to be a key growth area going forward into 2012. In terms of our support of SC11, we're involved in a lot of the BOFs and panels. We did a big data webcast this morning with Tabor Communications. There's a BOF tomorrow morning on big data. I'm also involved in a BOF on archiving in the cloud, a panel on the path to exascale. We have a couple of sponsored receptions. I'd like to invite everybody to the Intersect 360 Research reception that happened a few hours ago. I really hope you'll be there. We're also sponsors of the Beowulf Bash tonight. I hope you'll be there as well. It's a great venue at the aquarium, going to be fantastic. And my favorite is SC11 Analyst Crossfire. We've done this at a few conferences before. It's kind of a McLaughlin Group style panel that'll come in 30 minutes sharp, I promise, no matter how many topics we throw. I've got a great panel of experts from Cray, NVIDIA, Rocky Mountain Supercomputing Center, and British Petroleum. It's going to be a very high-paced, lively discussion, and I'm looking forward to it. We really support SC11. This is a huge conference for us, so we can't get enough. But we could work this conference for a month without running out of stuff to do, but we'd still drop dead of exhaustion at the end of a week, and we'd still run over a 10-minute presentation no matter how hard we try. Thank you very much. I appreciate everybody's time.